Here is the news report I wrote about the National Planning Conference of Homophile Organizations for the Kansas City Star in February of 1966. The homophiles were just plain old homosexuals, but in 1966, the word homosexual sounded scary, a little bit clinical, and homophile was a gentler way of saying the same thing. I will get to the details about the conference and the news story later, but first I want to tell you about the Kansas City Star and then about the homophiles. This is the Star's newsroom about 1966. In those days, it looked like a scene from Citizen Kane or the front page. There was a spittoon next to every desk. In the foreground, you see a dozen or so editors in white shirts and neckties. There were all kinds of editors: copy editors, wire editors, picture editors, layout editors, and most importantly, the city editor, who decided what news got covered. In the distance is an area of unoccupied desks where the reporters wrote their stories when they returned from their beats. So on February 20, 1966, a Sunday, I was working as a general assignment reporter. Sunday was always a slow news day, and this particular Sunday there wasn't much happening but a convention at a downtown hotel. A homosexual convention. I was assigned to cover it. A homosexual convention. Something unheard of in Kansas City. It was an interesting assignment, but it made me nervous. I was nervous because I was homosexual too, and very closeted. My gay experience so far was limited to anonymous encounters, and I didn't know anyone who was openly homosexual. In those days, if you were known to be homosexual, you couldn't hold a job at the Star or anywhere else. It wasn't just national security jobs. It was any job at all, except specialty occupations like hairdresser. But you especially couldn't work at the Star. I had pretty good gaydar, and I had spotted a couple of other reporters that I thought were probably gay. My gaydar alarm also was triggered by Casey Jones, the night city editor. His name actually was Donald D. Jones, but everyone called him Casey. Casey was in his early 40s, unmarried, and lived with his mother. Even more incriminating, he knew a lot about art and was an expert on the culture of the Hopewell Mound Builders, the lost Native American civilization of the Midwest. Besides that, he was a really good newspaperman, fair and honest and literate. Casey was also a mentor to young reporters, and more than anyone else, he taught me how to write. The Star cared about good writing. This was the Star's style book. Short sentences, short first paragraphs, vigorous English. But despite all the gaydar signals, there was never the least flicker of acknowledgement or recognition among any of us of what we had in common. And before very long, both the reporters who I thought might be gay quit their jobs at the Star and departed for San Francisco. So that was the Star. Now let me tell you about the homophiles. Hal Call was another refugee from the Star who wound up in San Francisco. Hal grew up in Grundy County, Missouri, and in 1941 enlisted in the Army as a private. He fought in the Pacific, won a Purple Heart, and mustered out as a captain. After the war, he came home and got a newspaper job. Then he got busted on a morals charge. It was a phony rap, but it cost him $800 to have it dismissed. He grumbled about it at work, and his boss told him, "Well, we can't have anybody like that working for the Kansas City Star." So Hal put all his belongings in the car and drove to San Francisco to start a new life. That was 1952. In California, Hal found the Mattachine Society, which had been founded 2 years earlier by Harry Hay and some friends. That is Hay at upper left in this photo at an early Mattachine Christmas party. Hay was a member of the Communist Party USA, and like the party, Mattachine was organized into cells with secrecy oaths and anonymous leadership. Hal Call was gay, but he wasn't a communist. He thought being homosexual was stigma enough, so he and some allies staged a revolution within Mattachine. They amended the society's constitution to affirm that its members were loyal to the United States. Mattachine was a national movement, but because of its policy of organizing in cells, it had only local groups. The ones represented at the Kansas City Conference were Mattachine of Florida, Mattachine Midwest of Chicago, Mattachine of Philadelphia, and Mattachine of New York, and of course Mattachine of San Francisco, represented by Hal. That's Del Martin, the petite one on the left, and Phyllis Lyon with a big smile. Impossibly young and completely in love. They founded the Daughters of Bitas, the lesbian organization, and they represented the San Francisco chapter at the conference. Del and Phyllis met in San Francisco in 1950 and became lovers in 1953. They happened to mention to some gay men they knew that they had no lesbian friends, and the men arranged some introductions. That gave them a social circle, and in 1955, they formally organized the social circle as the Daughters of Bitas. Very importantly, it was a women's organization. Mattachine was men only. Men and women homosexuals obviously had a common cause, but their alliance did not always run smoothly. That was one of the issues for the planning conference. Besides Del and Phyllis represented San Francisco, members of the Chicago and New York chapters of the Daughters of Bitas also attended. Barbara Giddings and Frank Kameny were a team, often appearing at the same protests and picket lines, and they were both at the planning conference. Barbara lived in New York. In 1956, she visited California and met Phyllis and Del, and when she returned to New York, she organized the New York chapter of the Daughters of Bitas. Later, she also organized the Gay Caucus of the American Library Association, and she was the editor of the latter, the review published by the Daughters of Bitas. Frank Kameny was attending an astronomy convention in San Francisco in 1956 when he was busted. He took a guilty plea and paid a $55 fine. But a year later, when he was working for the U.S. Army Map Service, the arrest record came to light, and he was fired and barred from any government employment in the future. He went to court, lost, appealed, lost again, appealed again, lost again, and then appealed to the Supreme Court, which refused to hear his case. So in 1961, he organized the Washington chapter of the Mattachine Society. This was intensely interesting at the highest levels of the FBI. Check out this memo to J. Edgar Hoover about the organizational meeting in 1961. As the group met, a spy was lurking nearby, and this is what he reported. He stated the door was left open, that he passed by the meeting on several occasions and observed about 10 well-dressed men in discussion. He heard mentioned the words bylaws and resolutions and stated that they were a very well-behaved group. Proper behavior was part of the strategy. The homophiles had a strict protest dress code. For men, suit and tie, dresses for women. Here is the dynamic duo in conservative clothes but with radical ideas at a demonstration organized by the East Coast Homophiles, a forerunner for the national conference. Don Slater, the editor of One magazine, also attended the conference. One was just in the process of breaking up and reorganizing, so I don't know if Don was representing the One Institute, but he had a long and honorable history of gay activism. Another attendee was Foster Gunnison. As far as I know, he was not affiliated with any of the groups, but he evidently was trusted by all because he was in charge of the Credentials Committee, seeing that the meeting was not infiltrated by the FBI or taken over by beatniks. A newly formed organization, the Society for Individual Rights, known by its acronym SIR, or SIR, also was represented. SIR published The Pocket Lawyer, a little card with advice like, say nothing, demand a lawyer. I used to carry a SIR Pocket Lawyer in my billfold. From Philadelphia, there was the Janus Society. Altogether, there were 40 or so people attending the conference. So I headed to the State Hotel for the news conference. I was the only reporter. The entire press corps was me. I found a room full of people. I didn't get their names or affiliations. My interaction was with the Reverend Clay Colwell, the group's spokesperson. It was a regular thing in those early days of the gay movement to recruit people of impeccable heterosexual credentials to be the public face, because homosexuality was so difficult to admit. Reverend Colwell was married with 3 children and a grandchild, and so above suspicion. There was no press release. Reverend Colwell explained to me what the meeting was about, and other people in the room chimed in with their ideas, and I listened. This was all very new and exhilarating to me. It didn't cross my mind to come out to them. I was still coming out to myself. Back in the newsroom, I needed a punchy lead, short, vigorous, and to the point. This came straight from the news conference. Laws against private homosexual conduct between consenting adults should be abolished. And then the list of demands: an end to police harassment, security clearances, equal opportunity in jobs in the military. I needed a phrase to introduce these outlandish ideas, and this is what I came up with. Taking the view that homosexuality is a justifiable way of life. And for me, that was a breakthrough. Homosexuality was not a sin. It was not a crime. It was not a misfortune. It was a way of life, and a justifiable way of life. That is what I learned at the National Planning Conference of Homophile Organizations. The conference ended, everyone went home. But now they had a national organization, and it had a list of demands. There were more homophile meetings and more protests. In Chicago, Frank Kameny came up with the slogan, "Gay is good," and marched with it. The homophile movement did not have a long run. The Stonewall riots were only 3 years in the future, and after that, the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance took the lead. The new generation rejected the suit and tie dress code and did not care if they looked like beatniks. But the homophiles did not fade away. Here are Frank Kameny and Barbara Giddings on the panel when Dr. John Fryer, wearing mask and wig, came out to the American Psychiatric Association in 1972. In 2016, to celebrate the 50th anniversary, the Gay and Lesbian Archive of Mid-America put up this marker on the site of the old State Hotel, a reminder of the first ever national gathering of gay and lesbian activists. I am glad to report that these homophiles did not go mad or commit suicide. Instead, they led long, happy, and successful lives. Hal Call ran the Adonis bookstore and the Cinematachine Theater in San Francisco. This is Hal in 1999. It was Hal who recruited the expert testimony that won the DSI obscenity trial in 1967, making male full frontal legal. Here are Dell and Phyllis cutting their first wedding cake. They had to get married several times because marriage equality was on, and then it was off, and then it was on, and then it was off before the Obergefell decision settled it. Here is Barbara with her companion, Kayla Husen. And Frank Kameny. He was still giving speeches at the age of 86. Finally, let me tell you about Casey Jones, the Night City editor. Casey stayed at the Star and rose from Night City editor to assistant managing editor and to national editor, right under managing editor and executive editor. Then in the next year, something happened. If there's anything I learned at the Star, it was, if in doubt, leave it out. And I can't verify what I heard, so I won't repeat it. But I can tell you that 1 year after being named national editor, Casey was abruptly kicked off the career ladder and exiled to the position of reader representative. When he died in 2000, Casey left an important collection of Hopewell artifacts to the Nelson Atkins Gallery in Kansas City, as well as a fund for the purchase of Native American art.